Hi there, my name is Ku Alagan, and today I'm going to take you through a quick Excel tutorial on how to automate tasks in Excel utilizing VBA. Now, you may have heard of the term VBA, which stands for Visual Basic Applications, its use cases, and how it can help automate tasks in Excel. Well, it actually does more than that. I like to paint the analogy of, let's say you're driving a standard car. Most cars have 5 gears. Knowing VBA allows you to go that one step further and shift to that 6th gear. Knowing VBA allows you to play around with the so-called fabric of Excel. It will allow you to program, if you like, the overall experience. It also brings out the power and the agility of Excel. Now, I don't consider myself by any means a programmer. However, I have used the tool quite extensively throughout my career, so this tutorial should be enough to get you started and familiar with VBA. Now, I'd like you to pause for a second and think to yourself, are there currently any tasks that you perform in Excel that's quite time-consuming? Well, it's likely that VBA will allow you to cut the amount of time it takes to complete those tasks. Now, I've used VBA for a variety of finance projects in the past. One thing I found it particularly useful for is when automating repetitive tasks performed on a daily or monthly basis. Now, for my tutorial today, I have what is known as a TB, or trial balance, that's used in finance for the production of financial statements such as an income statement or balance sheet. So as you can see on my screen, I have a simple TB, and this is typically downloaded from any ERP system, and it's widely used by folks in finance. The problem with this type of reports that are downloaded from an ERP is that there always seems to be some type of manipulation that's required to get it in the format needed. Now, as you can see, when this TB is downloaded, you have some redundant columns and rows. So what's required every single time this TB is downloaded is to delete these columns and rows and end up in a state where it can be used going forwards. Now, this can be achieved by what is known as a macro, and I'll take you through that in just one moment. And from here, you'll be able to run the macro every time this trial balance is downloaded by just one click of a button. Now, when you record a macro, one thing to keep in mind is that every keystroke is recorded and saved behind the scenes in VBA within what is known as a VBA project. Now, to view VBA, all you simply need to do is hit the Alt and F11 key together. Now, when you do this, you'll see on the screen that you'll have the VBA window open. It's important at this point not to get too overwhelmed with what everything means, but what you should be paying attention to at this point, there are 2 VBA projects on the left-hand side, one being a personal one, and one being the workbook in which you're working on at the moment, which is called Trial Balance Example. Now, all this means is that any code that is saved will either be saved in your personal VBA project or the Excel workbook that you're working on. The choice is yours when you start recording your macro. Now, I'm going to close the VBA window by simply clicking on the X on the top right hand corner of the screen. And now what we're going to do is navigate to recording a macro. Now, in the Excel ribbon, navigate to the View tab. Towards the far right, you will see macros. If you hit the drop down, you'll see 2 options. There is a View macro and a Record macro. With View macro, this is where all completed macros can be viewed and edited and run. But we want to record a macro, so we're going to close the screen, go back to our drop down, click on Record a macro. Once you do this, you'll get a prompt on the screen, and it will default to the latest macro name provided by Excel. In this case, it's macro 2. So we're going to go ahead and rename this, and I'm going to call it Trial Balance. Now, I've intentionally left a space in between trial and balance, and the reason is as a word of caution, there are a few rules to follow when we create macro names, and these are: if I click on enter, a warning message will appear. The syntax of this name isn't correct. Verify that the name 1 starts with a letter or an underscore, 2 doesn't include a space or a character that isn't allowed, and 3 doesn't conflict with an existing name in the workbook. In this case, we've actually included a space, so we have to remove this space, like so. What I'm also going to do is capitalize the B in balance. Now, I like capitalizing my words when going about any sort of programming, whether it's VBA, SQL, or Access. It just keeps things clean. Now, the next prompt is a shortcut key. Now, if you're familiar with shortcuts in Excel, you will know by now that copy and paste is Control-C and Control-V respectively. So what this will allow you to do is specify a combination that can trigger this macro to run for you. A rule of thumb You cannot use anything that's already been taken by Excel's native functionality, i.e. the copy and paste. So you cannot have a C in here or a B in here. Though I actually usually leave this blank, I actually like to use the buttons, like I mentioned, the one button click. So these buttons can be placed in your Excel ribbon, and I'll actually take you through that once we've completed the macro. The next step is asking whether you want to store this macro in your personal macro workbook, in a new workbook, or this workbook. Now, typically, I've always stored it in my personal macro workbook. This will enable me to always have access to the macro whenever I open up Excel. If I store it in this workbook, then I'll have to open this workbook particularly to run that macro. So I'm going to select the personal one, and the next prompt will ask us if we want to include a description. Now, I never really use this. I actually like to comment within my VBA code once I finish recording. So I'm going to show you how to add the description within the VBA code itself. So now that we've completed all this, I'm going to click on OK. Now that we started recording, we're going to be reminded that every keystroke is being recorded. So now what I want to do is go ahead and select column A, press the Control key so we can select multiple columns, select column C, as well as E and F and H. You can either select Control minus or right click and delete. Highlight rows 1 and 2, Control minus to delete those rows, select cell A1, navigate back to macros, stop recording. Now that we've finished recording our macro, we want to view it as well as the VBA code that was generated. To do this, we'll go back to the macros dropdown, click on View Macros. As you'll see, the trial balance under the personal workbook is visible. Now what we want to do is click on the Step Into button. Note that the VBA window is now open. On the left hand side, you'll note a couple of things have changed. Under the personal VBA project option, you've got a modules folder, as well as a module 1. On the right hand side, you'll see a set of code that was generated. This is a set of code that was generated when we recorded our macro. Let's just run through this code. Sub, trial balance, open parentheses, close parentheses. Sub basically stands for sub procedure or subroutine. This basically initiates the macro, and anything after this will start executing the code. The next part what we see is what was automatically generated by VBA. It's called trial balance macro, and it's basically a comment. The reason why I know it's a comment is 1, because it's in color green, as well as 2, it's followed by a single quote. Anything followed by a single quote is a comment within the code. So as mentioned previously, I was going to include a description of what this macro does. To do this, you simply have a single quote followed by a description of the macro. So this macro cleans up the TV once it has been downloaded from the ERP system. If you click out, it turns green, and this indicates that it is a comment. It does not contribute towards the code. The next part is range. Open bracket, double quote, A colon A. This basically selects column A, comma, C colon C. This basically selects column C, etc. So this is the code that was generated when we selected the columns within the workbook. Next part is range cell H1. So we ended up on cell H1. The next code is basically deleting everything to the left. So we're deleting all the columns that we selected above. Then we selected rows 1 and 2. This is the code to select those rows 1 and 2. And then the selection.delete is basically deleting everything up. We ended up selecting cell A1, and this is the code range, open bracket, double quotes, A1, double quotes, close brackets, dot select, selecting cell A1. We end off with end sub. This basically ends a subroutine or ends a sub procedure. And all macros out there that you'll see if you ever get to work with a macro, you'll see that it always ends with end sub. Any code in between sub and end sub is what executes the macro. So in here, you can easily select a different cell to end up on. So for example, cell A1, I can easily select B1. All I need to do is simply adjust the code to my liking. So this is how you get to play with the code. You'll be able to manipulate the code as you like. And that's it. And I hope that wasn't too overwhelming, but as you get familiarize yourself with VBA, you'll be able to understand the code by recording your macro, going back and looking at the code, manipulating the code, and it really is interesting as you get into it. So I'm just going to close the VBA window. This command will stop the debugger. Click OK. Now that we've gone through our VBA code, I'd like to show you how to create a button to activate this macro every single time it's downloaded. So this is the one button click macro. And I'm going to navigate to the quick access toolbar, right click here, click on customize quick access toolbar. On this selection, you'll see that you've got popular commands. In this drop down, select the macros. Now you'll see the trial balance macro that we created. If you select this, add it, now it should appear on the other side. Now you can choose to change the symbol of this macro. Now to modify it, you simply go down to the modify, click on modify. You've got a number of different symbols available to you. So I'm going to use the smiley face. Smiley faces are nice. Click on OK. You should see this, once you click OK, you should see the smiley face appear here. And now this is a one button to activate this macro once that trial balance is downloaded from the ERP. Now to put this into practice, let's undo and get it into the state that we had previously. Now to test this out, all you simply need to do, click this button, and there you have it. It goes into the state that we need it going forwards. Now I always found this useful. If you have, please give it a thumbs up, share the video, comment below, and thank you for watching.